Hello, I'm Phil Dobbie, and welcome once again to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. Today, capitalism without capital accumulation. Can capitalism really continue to work if we lose the focus on acquiring stuff? Perhaps because we're renting it. So the idea behind capitalism is that we are all driven to do better for ourselves. The failing of socialism, supposedly, is that whilst it would be nice to have everyone looked after, if we give too much, then there's nobody driven to succeed, so the economy stalls. Is capitalism stalling because too many people can't do better for themselves? So, Steve, let's take my mum and dad as an example. You know, they saved to buy a house, then they bought another bigger house. They did that a few times. They never got a really big house, but, you know, they did all right for themselves. They bought a new car every few years. And it seemed, you know, acquiring capital, acquiring houses, having stuff was their driving force. So how important is that thinking to the economy, do you think?
Oh, well, definitely the desire. There's two elements to that, the desire to consume and the desire to accumulate. And in general, the desire to consume is still there. The desire and the capability of consuming is still there. But we also have this desire to accumulate, and that really, for most of us, means accumulating financial assets. And in that case, the major financialized asset that we can actually purchase is the house. And to purchase the house, we've got to borrow money. If we borrow money and leave it up and we can sell it for a profit, then we might put down, if we put down $100,000 of our own money and buy a house for $1 million and its price doubles to $2 million, then we get 10 times the capital gain, and we think we're brilliant capitalists, and on the whole game goes. That continues working until such time as the next person who buys a house can't contemplate borrowing as much money as we did, and the whole thing falls over. And that's pretty much where we are right now, because with the level of private debt that we've accumulated in most of the Western world, it's simply impossible for younger people to take on that level of debt anymore. They've got to, it'll take them to 65 before they're going to have enough money to buy the house off your 65-year-old parents, who by that stage will be dead. And consequently, the bubble bursts, but accumulation stops. But those who've got themselves caught up on the whole thing are now got to service the huge amount of money they've borrowed to buy these properties. And since they're doing that, having accumulated, they can't afford to consume anymore. Well, that's, I think, where we are right now in a nutshell.
Yeah. My mum, by the way, she's not 65, she's 85. My dad's long ago shuffled off this mortal coil. But look, they never got that increase in house prices that you talked about, though. In those days, it was all very incremental. So it was all sort of like steady she goes. And there seemed to almost be a stability around it.
Well, that was actually before the 80s?
Yeah. Well, again, okay, they were still buying after the 80s. It was also in the north of England. So, you know, not a lot moves up there.
Yeah, well, that's again the period before Maggie Thatcher deregulated the housing market, because that's looking at the UK. I mean, I think I said the most remarkable chart in Can We Avoid Another Financial Crisis is the graph of the private debt to GDP ratio for the UK from 1880 till today. And from 1880 till 1980, it was basically flatlining at no more than 75% of GDP. When Maggie Thatcher took over, it was 55% of GDP. And then, bang, it went from 55% to 190% over the next 30 years. Now, in that period beforehand, a large part of the dynamic was that when you bought a house, almost always you were buying it through a building society. And the building societies fitted the neoclassical vision of lending, which you borrowed money that was saved by other people. And when you were using that money to buy your own house, they couldn't spend that own money. So it was a cooperative venture. But it meant that house prices weren't inflated. And therefore, across that period of time, there wasn't much capital appreciation. Now, of course, for the last 30 years, there's been nothing but capital appreciation. And now we're stuck in the aftermath where the only thing keeping the capital appreciation going is QE.
So the two things that you talked about then, so we've still got that ability to buy stuff, we've still got that ability to consume, but this ability to acquire stuff is not so easy. And of course, the reason we were doing it, obviously, was for security. We felt more secure. So how's that going to influence behavior, consumption behavior, for example? If we feel like we can't acquire, not only do we feel like we can't acquire, we actually physically can't acquire because we don't have enough money, because we're racked in debt from our university fees, for example. So we know we're never going to have a house. So we've thrown security out of the window. We can still spend, but we've got to pay off our debt as well. How is this all going to change behavior? How does it change this fundamental idea about how capitalism should work?
Well, what it means is people who are told you should aspire to accumulate, and if you don't accumulate, it's your own inability to do that. It's the sort of Ayn Randian vision of success, and for that matter, Donald Trump. There we go. The obligatory mention of Donald Trump vision of success. You can't do it collectively. Some individuals will be able to do it, but at collective level, the cohort we call on Generation X, whatever we call the next one coming through, will not be able to collectively do it. They're going to have less houses than their previous generation and so on. It has two effects. One is they themselves are in debt courtesy of things like university fees and the fact that they're working in zero contract hours and they're paying high transport costs, et cetera, et cetera. So their consumption is low by their financial circumstances. But at the same time, the people who are trying to sell those houses for a profit also can't do it. And their money is therefore going, what they've got at their income is going to service the debt. And this is one of the reasons that I'm very critical of the entire notion of savings at the national level, because the way savings is defined as not consumption. Yep. And consumption does not include what you're using to pay off your debt or service your debt. So when they talk about a high savings rate, which looks really good, what they're often talking about is the gap between income and consumption is extremely large, and that gap is being covered by financing our debt, both paying off what we can of the principal and servicing the interest. And there's no savings really going on at all. There's no increase in bank accounts.
And it's also money pulled out of the economy, of course, because we're not spending it on stuff. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. But once and this is again why the neoclassicals get it wrong, because their vision is the building society type vision. When you pay in a building society, back in the days when your mum and dad were buying properties, in the building society world, if you paid your debt off, then the money inside the building society level would rise, and therefore the people who had the accounts there could take money out or spend it.
But banks behave very differently. Look, you can hear the rest of that interview, the interview in full, along with all the other podcasts in this series, by subscribing to Debunking Economics at debunkingeconomics.com or being a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen. If you dedicate more than $10 per month to the cause, then you'll get access to all of these podcasts as well. We hope to see you back here again soon to hear it in full. Thanks for listening.